Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about recent developments in national transport data collections. There's four of us speaking, all from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts. So I'm David Mitchell. I'm Director of Transport Research and Modelling. Presenting with me today are Peter Johnston from the Road Safety Data Analysis section, Jason Ginn from our National Freight Data Hub section, and Brendan Lawrence, who's in the Infrastructure and Surface Transport Statistics section within the Bureau. Just confirm that slide has progressed to the outline of today's talk.
Yes, it has.
Yep. Thanks, Peter. In a minute or two, I'll just turn over to Peter who'll talk about heavy vehicle fatality data. Then I'll talk about the replacement motor vehicle census data and also freight forecasts. And then we'll talk a little bit about freight data hub related data collections and developments. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I'll be giving a short presentation on aggregated fatality trends and fatality data. We do have more detailed data than I'm presenting today, but due to the short overview style of our presentations, I'm concentrating on aggregated trends. So the overview of the presentation is as you can see, we've got some contextual background information on registration and license trends, fatal crashes over the last decade or so, some rates to standardize our crashes, a bit more detail into the location of where crashes are occurring and the people who are being fatally injured, and a brief look at injury crashes. So if we could move through to the first slide, please, David. Thank you. So as I mentioned, a bit of context into how the road freight industry is growing and changing over time. I should mention also that my presentation divides heavy trucks into two categories, heavy rigids and articulateds, all of which both categories are over 4.5 tonnes GVM. So as you can see, registrations are growing quite strongly for both types of heavy trucks and indeed almost all road vehicles. Articulateds are growing off a smaller base, but growing the most strongly, except for light commercials. Total road vehicles are growing at about 2% per annum, and that's been the case for 10 years. I might mention also that vehicle registrations are growing more strongly than population. Thanks, David. Brief look at licenses and freight. This data comes from the BITRE annual yearbook. We've been collecting and publishing this data for some time now. A bit more finely categorized in terms of heavy trucks. So we've got heavy rigids, light rigids, medium rigids. My understanding is that all of those are actually over 4.5 tonnes. Licenses are growing slower than registrations, and I might point out that there seems to be about 3 times as many licenses as registered vehicles, for heavy trucks, that is. And we do have an interesting data issue in the heavy rigid line at the top, but that data comes from our registration license databases around the states. Road freight growing smoothly, 18% over 10 years. So that's a bit of background into registrations and licenses over the last 10 years or so. Thank you, David. Here we've got some trends for the counts of fatal crashes. So the first two graphs are looking at the last 10 years by quarter. Quite a lot of volatility around the trend and really pretty weak trends in terms of counts of fatal crashes. There are trends there for the blue graph articulated, but not strong. So we're looking at about 20 fatal crashes per quarter for articulated involved. Looking at annual data to the right, a bit longer, 15 years or so, we can see the articulated blue trend a little bit more easily on this one. And that's been tracking at a 1.8% reduction per year. Compare that to all road crashes, that's tracking at about, it's pretty flat. It says 0.1% per year, but it's been flat for 10 years. No real trend in heavy rigid truck involved crashes. So we'll standardize these graphs into rates in the next chart. Thank you, David. So here I've divided the number of fatal crashes by registrations and also by VKTs. So here we can see the reductions more clearly, especially for articulated. Articulated registrations are going up, crashes are coming down slightly, so the rates are coming down more clearly. For articulated, we're looking at a 4% reduction for fatal crashes divided by registration. We're looking at a 4% reduction per year. Heavy rigid, a 1% reduction per year over 10 years. And for all crashes, a 2% reduction per year. VKTs, it's not quite as clear. Still evident for articulated. So we're using BITRE VKT estimates for the rates there. Next slide, please, David. Looking a little bit more detail into where fatal crashes are occurring and the types of crashes that are occurring. First of all, 80% of fatal crashes involving a heavy truck occur in a regional or remote area. And that's slightly higher for articulated, of course. Heavy rigids are about 60% are regional or remote. So that's the left-hand chart. That's where, I'm sorry, could we just pop back to that chart? Thanks. On the right-hand side, we've got the number of vehicles involved in the fatal crashes. 70 to 80% of fatal crashes involving a truck also involve another vehicle. And it increases when we're in a major city area. And it also increases for heavy rigid trucks compared to articulated trucks. Thanks, David. Moving on to who are the people or the road users who are being fatally injured. This graph tells us two things. Both graphs are the same. Left is for articulated involved, right is for rigid. So we've got a year comparison, 5 years versus previous 5 years. And we've also got who is being fatally injured. So we can see that light occupants are the majority of people, light vehicle occupants are the majority of people being killed. And the other group of people being killed are the truck drivers, essentially. I've got occupants, but it's essentially drivers. So 20% of the people, of total people being killed are truck drivers. And that's slightly increasing. So compared to the last 5 years compared to the 5 years previously, the number of truck drivers being killed compared to the other road users being killed in these crashes, truck drivers are slightly increasing. The other is motorcyclists, pedestrians, and other road users. So we've got about 60% of heavy rigid, 60% of heavy truck crashes is a light vehicle occupant being killed, and roughly 20% is a truck driver being killed. Thanks, David. Looking now at one slide for injury crashes. These combine up both articulated and heavy rigid into the one group. So these are crashes where a heavy truck's involved, and it's a count of total people being injured. So on the left-hand side, we've got around 550 to 600 injured people in crashes involving trucks per year. And if we look at the ratio compared to the people being killed, we've got around 2 to 3 times as many people being injured. If we look across to the right, that's all road crashes, and we can see quite a significant increasing trend in the number of injuries per year. And we see the ratio of total injuries to total fatalities for road crashes is around 32 times. So quite a distinction between what is essentially light vehicle crashes versus heavy vehicle crashes. So that's injuries, hospitalized injuries. Around 32 times as many people are being injured as people being killed. Thank you, David. So here are our data sources. We have the National Crash Database, and as you can see here, 100+ fields from the state governments, of course. Everything included, fatal, severe, minor. Around 12 to 18 months, roughly, on average lag. And then we've got the ARDD, the second one, and that's published online. That's all fatal crashes. Both these are collected by BITRE. And the third fatal crash data source is the NCIS, National Crash Coronial Information System, which gives us a lot of detail on background causative factors. That's our fatal crashes. And for injuries, our sources are the AHW, which is the main national source of hospitalised injury data. And that's what I used for the presentation. And the state government transport agencies, most of them make available their crash data as well. We still have some difficulties in injury level data from the states because the definitions still are not quite matching. So we tend to use AHW for injury data. That's the background of our crash data. And finally, thanks, David. Some of our publications dashboards. They're all available on BITRE website. So we've got monthlies, some annuals, some injury data, some road safety enforcement data, a number of dashboards, a number of annual publications, and quarterly monthlies. So there we are. That's the presentation for heavy truck safety trends. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We've got one question sort of in advance of the chat. What I was going to do was leave questions until the end so that we could get through the rest of the presentations. So there's one road safety question, so we'll come back to that when we get to the Q&A part of the session.
Sure.
So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the motor vehicle stats, developments in motor vehicle statistics in BITRE. So we're asked to talk about the ABS motor vehicle census and the replacement for that. So just by way of background, the ABS motor vehicle census provided a full enumeration of all registered motor vehicles since 1971 up until the ABS ceased the collection in 2021. So just for point of reference, the number of vehicles has grown from around 5.1 million back in 1971 to just over 20 million vehicles today. And that's motor vehicles, doesn't include trailers and plant and equipment, which comprise another 4.5 million vehicles or so. Vehicle characteristics included in the motor vehicle census are some of those featured on the slide. So state and postcode of registration, vehicle type, make and model, year of manufacture, fuel type. The motor vehicle census was a key data set in informing a range of government policy, including safety, emissions, particularly sharp now with low and zero emission vehicle uptake. Industry are very interested in the collection, insurers, motor vehicle repairers, and there's a lot of media attention paid to this collection. So when, well, the Bureau found out that the ABS notified stakeholders that they'd be ceasing their motor vehicle census collection around about August, September in 2020. We in BITRE had conversations with the ABS and also NEBDIS to discuss options, because this is really a pretty key and important data set for a lot of government decisions, as I noted on the previous slide. So we actually entered into a sort of a 2-year effort to stand up a replacement for the former ABS motor vehicle census. So you can see sort of the timeline there. Essentially, we engaged NEBDIS to undertake an assessment of the suitability of the NEBDIS data collection for standing up a replacement motor vehicle census. Previously, the ABS had sourced vehicle registry data direct from each of the states and territories. States and territories, as many of you will know, currently provide a live sort of feed of their registry data to NEBDIS, which is the National Exchange of Vehicle and Driver Information System. That assessment, which was undertaken between March and July of 2021, essentially concluded that NEBDIS would be a suitable raw data set for standing up a replacement motor vehicle census. Essentially, it includes all of the fields required, or that the ABS previously published in the motor vehicle census. Between December 2021 and May 2022, we engaged NEBDIS again to essentially build a bespoke data extraction system to provide the raw data to us for standing up a replacement motor vehicle census. The NEBDIS also took 2 snapshots of the live system on the 31st of January 2021 and also the 31st of January 2022. They provided us those snapshots around about March last year, and then we embarked on a really probably a 6 to 8 month process to build a replacement system to process the raw data and turn the outputs into a motor vehicle census product. So the first issue of that our collection of the motor vehicle, of registered motor vehicles in Australia, was released in October last year. We're currently, since then, we've been doing some system refinements, and NEBDIS have also provided us with an extract for the 31st of January 2023, and we've been processing, since about February, we've been processing that data for the next issue, and we're planning to release the next issue sometime next month. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the journey we've been on, sort of the left-hand side of this slide provides a bit of a schematic of the sort of the system build. And the reason it took us sort of that 6 months is we're dealing with about 44 million records, and of which about 25.8 million are registered vehicles. We had to really build a whole series of reference tables, so to undertake a whole lot of data cleaning and standardization. In the raw data, there's a lot of misspelling, abbreviations, particularly of make and model. There's a bit of missing information that we're able to infer. There's missing information that we're unable to infer. There can be incorrectly coded units in some fields, or incorrectly coded information about a vehicle sort of motor power or fuel type. And we also turn sort of the different state and territory vehicle classifications into a standard vehicle type. So passenger vehicles, light commercial vehicles, light rigid trucks, heavy rigid trucks, etc. Our live system code at the moment runs to about 12,000 lines. Our reference database is about 1 gigabytes, and the NEVDIS database itself is about 120 gigabytes, and that's for 1 year. So we've got about, as I say, we've got 3 sets now. The outputs available from our collection are very similar to the outputs available under the previous ABS census. So they're on the left. They run to, as I said, state, postcode of registration, vehicle type, make, model, year of manufacture, motive power type, gross vehicle mass, gross combination mass, and national and heavy vehicle type related to the heavy vehicle charge code. We've added some additional fields to the data set. So we can also provide information by garaging state, garaging postcode, and we're looking to also make data available by suburb. We've also, for vehicles that are registered to an industry entity, we've classified that according to industry subdivision. And we've also expanded the range of motive power or fuel type information available by adding explicit categories for hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles. So they previously weren't in the motor vehicle, or weren't separately enumerated in the motor vehicle census that the ABS undertook. Future innovations that we're looking at are to link with the Green Vehicle Guide and potentially attach fuel efficiency and emissions intensity information that's available in the Green Vehicle Guide. And we provide just a bit of colour on this slide with the registered number of battery electric vehicles by make that we reported in last year's issue. No surprise, Tesla is the largest number, provides the largest number of registered battery electric vehicles in Australia at present. Just for this morning's presentation, we've also dug out a little bit of information about the number of registered trucks. So in 2022, there were 375,000 approximately heavy rigid trucks and about 115,000 articulated trucks on register. So the number of articulated trucks was up about 5% on 2021. So that's grown quite significantly in the last several years. And just also for a bit of exposition, as examples of what we can provide from the data set, this slide just shows registered heavy vehicles by year of manufacture. I suppose a notable feature is the large number of 35 plus year old rigid trucks still registered for use. There is similarly a large, significant number of 35 plus year old articulated trucks still registered for road use. Just turning attention to the survey of motor vehicle use, the ABS used to undertake a survey of motor vehicle use, which provided us with statistics on actual freight activity, road freight activity in Australia. That collection, and I reported at a presentation we did to Nat Roads about June last year, I reported on some work that we had started to undertake to look at replacing the survey of motor vehicle use. I won't go through all the points on this slide today, except to note that we got to a point last year where we got results from that bit of work. It recommended that essentially a vehicle-based survey was still the most cost-effective means of collecting information, particularly about heavy vehicle road use. However, a vehicle-based collection would require significant cooperation of states and territories. There are complications around accessing personal information on registry databases that the ABS legislation enabled them to undertake, and we the Department of Infrastructure don't have sort of similar legislation. So progress on that replacing the surveyed motor vehicle use has really been delayed because of all the work we've been doing to stand up replacement for the motor vehicle census. We'll be looking to start taking some more action on replacing it, looking at how we replace the surveyed motor vehicle use in the second half of this year. Just for today, I thought I'd touch briefly on some other work that we've produced in the last 6 months. We were asked to talk about modal efficiencies. I thought I'd sort of put in the context of our freight forecasts. So the Bureau provides a suite of national level freight forecasts. We released back in November last year some updated national freight forecasts by transport mode and also a breakdown of our road freight forecast by state and territory. We have plans to also release forecasts of port container throughput and bulk port throughput, and also air freight forecast as an adjunct to our our air passenger forecasts. A bit of context about the freight forecasts. On the lower left, you can see sort of the size of the relative size of the freight tasks. So road accounts for about 29 to 30% of total road freight in tonne kilometre terms, and rail freight accounts for about 50% today. Much of that is iron ore and coal freight. And the schematic on the top right shows or highlights where a lot of that rail and also coastal shipping freight occurs. A lot of it is essentially in moving bulk products, and it impacts the amount of modal substitution that might be possible in this country. So just an overview of our freight forecasts that were released last year. We were projecting total freight would grow by about 26% over the next 30 years. That's driven by really limited growth or limited projected growth in rail freight, limited projected growth in iron ore and coal rail freight. Road freight we're projecting would grow by about 1.9% per annum over the next 30 years, which is slightly below historical trends. As I said, we also produce we also break down the road freight forecasts by state and territory and within state and territories. So the lower left shows our capital city road freight forecasts. Melbourne is featured to be the highest or largest road freight activity by city, and the right hand side shows New South Wales has the largest volume of road freight. Our road freight forecasts are particularly impacted by the discontinuation of the surveyed motor vehicle use because it was the primary source for our historical estimates and upon which the freight forecasts are based. I've got a couple of slides here which just highlight the bulk commodity nature of the rail and coastal shipping freight tasks. So here you can see the relative size of or relative dominance of iron ore and coal in Australia's freight task. I suppose the key or the area where there is potential opportunities for substitution is in and around that interstate non-bulk freight and some of the tasks around port movements. I'll just skip over the coastal freight forecast overview. So as I said, we were asked to talk a little bit about modal efficiencies and potential substitution possibilities. The slide on the figure on the left shows sort of relative transport costs. Now, of course, freight transport costs will vary a lot by task, location and volume. We've periodically benchmarked long distance non-bulk freight rates, and those are the relativities shown in the slide on the left. Essentially, coastal shipping is cheaper per tonne kilometre than rail, which is cheaper than road freight. The graph on the right shows the freight transport emissions intensity of in Australia for trucks, rail, and coastal shipping. No surprise that coastal shipping and rail are much more or less emissions intensive than road freight. So now we'll turn to some freight data hub related projects that are being undertaken within the department. So I'll continue talking a little bit about the road freight telematics collection and then hand over to Jason and Brendan. We did, Georgia O'Kiernan did brief NatRose back in June last year about the scope of the National Freight Data Hub project. So I'm just reproducing this slide, which shows sort of the 13 core data projects. And we're talking here a bit about the road data, the truck movement data, the customs data, and the rail freight data, which are the first 4 of those boxes on this slide. Just in terms of truck movement data and telematics data. So we in the Bureau have been working with a small number of industry operators who are providing us with telematics data from which we are producing sort of information about congestion, truck rest stop usage, and also movements to and from ports. We're aiming to try and expand that collection over the next 6 to 8 months. And so we'll be engaging with government and industry stakeholders to really look at the governance arrangements and, you know, map out a sort of a systemic approach to how we might collect truck movement data on a larger scale that can help both inform government decisions, but also industry decisions. I've just got a couple of slides here which highlight some of the outputs we're already producing with the telematics data. So, for example, this slide shows some of the outputs that are available on the Freight Data Hub prototype website, which shows congestion for vehicles for selected routes. So you can choose a route and the underlying telematics data we've essentially combined and aggregated to provide sort of travel times across hours of the day, typical travel times across months of the year and days of the week. And I mentioned also we've used the data to talk about or provide some outputs related to usage of rest areas across Australia. So this slide just shows a snapshot of the Freight Data Hub website, and you can zoom in and look at particular publicly available rest area locations, look at utilisation and the characteristics and facilities available at those rest area locations. I'll hand over now to Jason to talk about some of the work he's been doing trying to improve our rail freight data.
Hi there, my name is Jason. I'm from the National Freight Data Hub. So my presentation part is pretty much talking about how we are modeling the train schedule and train GPS pins data that we've been getting from ARTC. So ARTC is the state-owned track manager for most of the interstate networks that is being used for rail freight. And can we just go to the next slide, please? So, so there's been a lot of work happening for the truck telematics data, but they've been struggling to actually get data for rail freight. In essence, the data just don't go down to that very granular level. Traditionally, they've been getting data from ARTC, but once a year, but those data is very, very high level. It only covers train movements on their network, and it's only good for reporting purposes. And it's very hard to get data from train operators. There's just a lot of them. They operate in different locations, and they can't get the same kind of data from all of them. So BITRE has had a long-standing, working relationship with ARTC, and that allowed us to have a formal data sharing agreement with them, so that they can actually use their unit record systems data that they use for operations. And this presentation is about pretty much what we're doing with it now that they have access to it. Next slides, please. So what is ARTC data, right? So the data we got is unit record. It's very granular. It's pretty much, timestamp, lat long sort of a thing. So there's two kinds of data. One is the RAMS data. It's essentially a train schedules data. It shows, it's pretty much from one, rail signal post to another, what the schedule time is, scheduled arrival is, departure arrival time is, and what the actual arrival and departure time is. That data also has a lot of information around the train operator, who they are, what kind of train is it? Is it a steel train, minerals train, cargo train or whatever. Also has some information around the train length and the total mass of the train. That's the train schedule data. The ICE data is essentially a timestamp and a lat long, right? That's pretty much it. It's very narrow, and it's a very large data set. The time interval for each ping is about a minute, but can be up to 18 minutes in rural areas where there are no 3G or radio coverage. And there is also a speed that is derived from the pings, a straight line distance from one ping to another. Because the pings are pretty frequent, that's quite reliable. And in the middle of nowhere, the tracks are pretty straight anyways. So, those are the two data that we're working with. Next slide, please. So what do we hope to make out of it? So like I said, the data is captured by ARTC, by the track operator, for operational purposes, so they can schedule trains around so they don't ram into each other. It's inherently meaningless for research and analysis, so you can't use it for the likes of charts and tables and modeling that David, Mitchell, and Peter just showed you. But our job is to model it so that we can use it. So that involves essentially model that data so that we can use it to calculate the train count, the tonnage, the average speed by the type of trains and the rail segment that the train runs on, right? Once you can aggregate the information by rail segments, you can link the rail segments up to keep freight routes, and then you can calculate origin destinations. So we're working on creating these two data sets, model data, which will feed into visualization and stuff like that, that folks like you guys or some of you in industry might be able to access. So I'm going to be talking about how we're going about the modeling, which involves two parts. One is to create a rail map. The other one is to snap the GPS pings to the rail map. Next slide, please. So I won't go through the intricate details because it's not fun, but essentially when it comes to creating the rail map, the purpose is to create a simplified fishbone sort of a map of the railway tracks that they are interested in, because the pings are quite fuzzy. If you don't simplify the tracks, especially in rail yards or complex intersections, then the ping will just go to multiple tracks, and then you'll never be able to link them together. So the data we're working with to create the rail map is from Geoscience Australia. The data is not very good. It's missing a lot of the track attributes, and it includes light rails and stuff. So you can see two maps here, right? The first one is essentially what we got, and the second one is what we turned it into. Doesn't look that different from a macro level, but essentially they juggle the tracks around to try to link up them into the standard and dual gauge versus the narrow or the broad. We get rid of all the trams, light rails, whatever, and they try to simplify it by getting rid of tracks that runs parallel to each other, that are too close, get rid of the passing loops, spurs, and etc., and then create long continuous segments between intersections, which we then dice up if it passes through a place of interest. And that's the map that we're using to snap the train GPS pings to actually derive the modeled data. Next slide, please. So when it comes to assigning the train GPS pings to the rail map, I just got a simple schematic diagram on the right. So as you can see that the pings can be all over the place, right? And what we do is if the ping is general vicinity where the tracks are really complex, they try to reduce the tolerance level, the precision tolerance level, so that it doesn't assign to the wrong track. But if the pings are in a place where there's only really one track in 10 kilometers or something, then that's a simple, straightforward exercise. So so essentially the point is to snap the pings to the nearest point on the nearest rail segment, and they throw out a lot of pings when the tracks are really complex. But then when the tracks are really complex, chances are in rail yards or at ports or near ports, the trains are moving a lot slower anyways, and they're generating one ping, sort of a ping a minute, so you can afford to throw out a few of them. Whereas if in the middle of the desert, the train goes really fast, so you can't afford to throw them out as much. So you just have to, put them to the right place. And then once we've done that, we can roll up data, the train level data by the rail segments, which we then retrieve the data from the train schedules to tell you what operator trains or what commodity trains or the tonnage of the trains that runs on each of these different segments. Next slide, please. So they process the data in Databricks, which is, you see the slide from David earlier. So he talked about Azure platform. So that's cloud-based computing environment, and Databricks is essentially that. It allows us to make it infinitely much more scalable. They can take a computer cluster that is, say, 256 gig RAMs and 96 cores or something to just brute force all the pings, like 200 pings at a time. And it's a very large data, so this is the only way we can get around to it. And the idea is that as the data comes in, we retrieve the data periodically on a weekly basis from AITC. As the data comes in, we can schedule the process. So then, then we create the model data after data feed comes through. And like I said, there will be two model data. One will be the more granular level, which will fit into a data visualization, a dashboard of sorts, and which we also use for data requests internally. The other one, which is aggregated to the key freight routes, will be something that they will share and make public with AITC approval. Next slide, please. So here just some sort of output to show you what it looks like. The first one shows you the intermodal trains that travels across a nullable. Sort of shows you, pretty much all of them goes to Perth, but so it shows you where the same train goes to. Like, the same train goes to Melbourne or Sydney, but most of them go to Melbourne, and then the cargo may be loaded to another train that goes from Melbourne to Brisbane, for instance. And the second map shows you, mineral trains that goes to Perth pretty much, and you can see that it kind of starts on the right. It starts from Broken Hill and goes past Port Pirie and stuff like that. And next slide, please. So may I add that the width of the line shows you the relative volume of the relative volume of the cargo that is moved, pretty much. So at this point, the lines are proportional to the tonnage of the trains. And here's the two maps showing you the steel trains coming out of Port Kembla and steel trains coming out of Whyalla. And you can see that those trains go to very different places. The trains come out of Port Kembla pretty much services the east coast, whereas the Whyalla train pretty much services Perth and Sydney and Melbourne, but doesn't go to Brisbane. And this is the level of detail that we don't get from other sources. Next slide, please. So what are they working on? So like I said, this is a project that sort of started more or less since the end of last year. There's still a lot of progress that we can make out of it. such as, we got the total mass of the trains, but they need to figure out how much does an empty train weigh or fully loaded train weigh for different type of trains. We can probably then use that to calculate load factor. We can probably calculate the fastest moving train on a segment, and then how each of the trains may be slower than that to figure out maybe there might be some sort of congestion or whatnot. So we can derive new metrics out of the data that we have now. We can probably make more out of the RAM's train schedule data once we manage to geocode where the signal posts are. Then we can look at where delays typically occurs on the ARTC network. We don't have data for the likes of the iron ore and the coal shipments to the port that David showed you in his map of Australia earlier, but they can probably derive that from the customs data looking at exports. And we really hope to get some use out of this data that we've modeled so far, which may help us to try to show that it's useful, and they might be able to get similar kind of data from other track managers such as V-Line, so that we can get more of a complete national coverage. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
So hi everyone, my name is Brendan and I'm an analyst working in the Infrastructure and Service Transport Statistics team in BITRE. Today I'm going to be talking about the customs data, but in the interest of time I'll try and get through my presentation as quickly as possible. Next slide please. So before beginning, I just wanted to note that these slides can't show any of the customs data just due to the need for data sharing agreements to be signed before sharing even insights from the data. So I'm only going to talk about the customs data in a very high level sense. Next slide, please. So what is it? Customs data is sourced from the Department of Home Affairs, and it's compiled from customs declarations which are submitted by exporters and importers. Each commodity in a customs declaration is given its own row in the data, and it includes information which can be found in import and export declarations. This includes information about the good being imported or exported, the method of transportation, the AHECC classification, and locational data. And I included the reference to the International Merchandise Trade data set from the ABS because that represented one of the most significant contributions to BITRE publications involving import and export data in the past. But some areas where the customs data, which we just gained access to in mid-2021, or late 2021 rather, represents a value add, is that the IMT database doesn't include information about containerized goods. We can make inferences to the data without worry for omissions due to confidentiality, which represented a large portion of the data in the past. And the IMT database also didn't include information on the origins and destinations of freight in Australia. Next slide, please. So some of the areas that we were currently thinking about, some of the initiatives that we're currently thinking about at BITRE for the customs data could include visualizations of freight movements for containerized and non-containerized goods, forecasts for inbound and outbound freight. So the visualizations that we could be producing is shown on the left, an example on the left, and on the right-hand side is from the BITRE's freight transport forecasts. So those two just show examples of what we could potentially do with the customs data. And we could also look at developing association rules based on clusters of commodities. Next slide, please. So in terms of data sharing, if you're interested in this data, the setup is that under the broad letter of exchange with the customs, we have separate data sharing agreements that are signed off in 3 ways with us, the recipients, and back with the Department of Home Affairs. These include undertakings that the recipients won't share on the data. We can include things like record data, commodity information, tons, and container ID. But as we have addresses in the data, there is a limit to what we can provide on information of geographical area. Next slide, please. So before on sharing the customs data or future versions of the customs data, there are a few additional value adds that we were hoping to work out. So the first one was in the area of data cleaning. The customs data is completely fine from an operational perspective, but as it has been designed for administrative purposes, and we're looking at it from a freight data perspective, there's a little bit more work that could be done to make it easier to draw statistical conclusions from. We were also thinking about how we could isolate for business headquarters from likely freight locations and how we could match this to telematics data. We also wanted to iron out net weight per commodity, because at the moment the customs data is presented in different units. So it can be in kilograms, square meters, and lengths. So we wanted to standardize all of these. And we were also looking at visualizations, as I had mentioned before. So just for some closing remarks, there's a hope that we can replace the ABS as a source for this data when it comes to freight and our departmental specializations. We're hoping to on-share the data, but we're still getting the final version into our system. But we note that data sharing agreements require three-way signatures. So if you're interested in the data, the earlier the better. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. We do have a few questions. I can read them out now. We have one here. Do you have a forecast on the road freight emissions as alternative fueled vehicles become more prevalent, i.e. electric and hydrogen?
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I was actually drafting an answer as I was stepping through slides. So we have previously produced forecasts of road freight emissions. We can, in theory, produce forecasts of road freight emissions. We haven't actually factored in any of our recent work, you know, potential uptake of alternative fuel source vehicles in the freight sector, purely because it hasn't been a high priority at present. And there's been really a relatively low uptake of alternative fuel source freight vehicles, road freight vehicles. Light vehicles are taking a lot of the attention at the moment, so uptake of electric vehicles in the light component of the fleet.
Great. Also, does the skew in 35-plus-year-old trucks affect this data?
That's a very good question. We've been so focused on processing the data and getting outputs out, we've had little time to really investigate some of the outliers that sit in this data. So it was actually in producing the slides for this presentation that it, you know, became obvious, you know, the 35-plus-year-old vehicles in the fleet. So we'll do a bit more investigation of that, and I suppose check the validity of it, and also then do some thinking about the, you know, how it might be skewing activity.
Great. I have two more questions. As the Bureau celebrates over 50 years of delivering applied research and national statistics, could you share some examples of how the findings from data collections, such as the National Heavy Vehicle Road Crash and Road Fatality data, have been used to inform significant policy decisions that have improved the reliability, safety, and efficiency of the Australian transport system? Can you hear me?
I think that's Peter. I can see him speaking, but we can't hear him for some reason. Yeah, we still can't hear him over the microphone. I can hear him from across the other side of the room. So he might be experiencing the problems I was experiencing at the start of the session.
I do have another question if we want to move on to the next one, but if Peter wants to look at his audio if you wish.
Sure.
Yeah. With the discontinuation of the ABS's motor vehicle census, could you elaborate on the replacement motor vehicle census collection developed by BITRE, including its methodology and how it contributes to a better understanding of the Australian transport landscape? Additionally, how does this data collection assist in addressing emerging challenges and opportunities in the road transport industry, such as the increasing demand for sustainable and alternative fueled vehicles?
Yeah, so I suppose I think I addressed sort of the methodology provided an overview of the methodology in the presentation. But essentially, in terms of its contribution to sort of addressing emerging challenges and opportunities in the road transport industry, I mean, it really is almost like it's the baseline data set that is essential to understand what the size of the fleet looks like, you know, how many alternative fueled vehicles are on register, you know, what the speed of uptake is, where those vehicles are actually registered. So it's going to be very useful. It's almost essential to a lot of the policy development work that is going on in the transport space. For example, fuel quality standards and fuel efficiency standards work, and also, you know, government policy to speed up uptake of low and zero emission vehicles across the fleet. So it really just, as I say, it provides almost like the core data set that provides you that allows you to understand where are we at the moment, and then project what the future might look like.
Thank you. We don't have any other questions. And Peter, did you want to see if we can hear you? No, we still can't hear you, I'm afraid. What we could do is we could maybe get your answer to that question in writing, and we can include that with the presentation when we share that with our members. So that concludes the presentation. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please send an email to info@natroad.com.au. Today's webinar will be uploaded to the NatRoad website, and a link will be emailed to members. Thank you once again for attending.